Divination has a long history in China. Divination is the seeking of hidden significance in what appears to be unconnected, innocuous objects. Many forms of divination are still in use today. Think palm reading, Ouija boards, tarot cards, horoscopes, and astrology, for just a few examples. Divination can be found in the histories of most cultures around the world. But for this part of the lecture, we'll focus specifically on divination in China, because some of China's most ancient forms of divination are so well documented. As you can see here on the timeline, we'll be talking about Shang-era divination around 1600 to 1000 BCE. We will also be talking about the life of Confucius, which is around 500 BCE. And just so you know, I said divination has been around in China for a long time. The earliest evidence of divination in China that we have was done with turtle shells, and it was in 7000 BCE, so that's a very long time ago. There are three primary forms of divination employed in ancient China, and these are scapulomancy, stock casting with yarrow or milfoil stalks, and geomancy. Scapulomancy is the consulting of oracle bones. You have an in-depth reading about this. It's crucially important to understanding what historians can learn about ancient Chinese society because of these bones. So make sure that you do that reading. Most existing oracle bones date back to the Shang era, which is 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE. So we've learned a lot about the Shang through the recovery of oracle bones. Shang diviners used animal bones, usually the scapula of an ox, which is where the term scapulomancy comes from, and they wrote queries on the bones about the future. So they would ask a question like, is the emperor going to die, or something like that. They'd put the bones with their inscriptions into a fire, and the bones eventually cracked as they cooked. Diviners were specialists at reading the cracks in these bones. In a way, they gave them answers to the questions that they had inscribed on the bones. Stock casting in ancient China is slightly more mysterious to us. We only have documentation of medieval stock casting methods, but we know that stock casting was used in ancient times. Stock casters used the dried stalks of the yarrow plant and sometimes the milfoil plant. We aren't sure what stock casting looked like in the Shang era, but we know it was used as a second opinion after consulting oracle bones. Medieval stock casting involved the use of 50 dried stalks, split and grouped in various steps, and it's a long process that involves many mathematical calculations. Diviners used the splitting of the stalks to calculate the probability of any given future event. Stock casting is still used today, so even if you just do a quick Google, you'll be able to see different stock casting methods and kits of stocks that people sell, probably on Etsy or something, so you can look into that if you'd like. The final form of divination that was popular in ancient China was geomancy. Natural landforms, for example, a cliff facing a certain direction or a valley twisting in a certain way, were believed to be more or less auspicious than others. Auspicious places contain good energy. They can be absorbed by the people and the plants that inhabit the space. So the same thing happens with places that are deemed as inauspicious. So those plants and people can sort of absorb this negative energy. The arrangement of landforms is analogous with the human body. Vital energy flows through the land, just like blood flows through the veins of the human body. The ancient Chinese knew that blood brought life to human cells, so they perceived this positive energy as the lifeblood of the land and the people, animals, and plants who lived on it. Some practitioners describe geomancy as acupuncture, but for the earth. But essentially, geomancy is the skilled interpretation using a special compass, that's pictured here, of natural landforms to determine which areas will be most nourishing for life. We still use geomancy today, but we apply it to our built environments, so the insides of our houses, and its Chinese name is feng shui. Divination in some ways intertwines with the practice of Chinese medicine. Both scapulomancy and geomancy suggest that there is a unity of the body, the earth, and the spirit world. This idea finds new life in Confucian ancestor-worship, as you'll see in a few minutes. Even though many organized religions have become popular in China, Buddhism and Christianity, for example, divination is still a crucial element of East Asian cultures today. Now we're going to move on to Confucianism. We're going to sort of fast forward 1,000 years. So keep in mind that we're traveling over vast amounts of time. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about Confucianism, and we'll go on to talk about a little bit more about the 6th century BCE in the rest of this module. Confucius, known during his lifetime as Confucius, was born during the Zhou dynasty in 551 BCE. During his lifetime as a philosopher and tutor for aristocratic children, Confucius created a rational, ethical philosophy with the goal of producing social harmony and order through virtuous governance. His teachings are collected in 20 books called the Analects, which was compiled after his death by his students. Confucius believed that efforts needed to be made to control the Chinese population, so his philosophy focuses on organizing people and relationships in hierarchical ways. There are 5 primary Confucian values that he taught, and the first one is one that a lot of people are familiar with. It's filial piety, which is basically love and respect for your parents. The second is moral wisdom. So he valued wisdom, but only if it was sort of informed by morality. The third is righteousness. The fourth is benevolence or humanity. Benevolence basically just means goodness. And the fifth is propriety. And by this he meant knowing how to act and acting in the right way. So not only did you need to be informed on what was appropriate behavior, but you also had to act that way. Confucius believed that laws just didn't work. Rulers must set moral examples that people will follow if they're showing the correct level of deference to their ruler. So there were several essential relationships in which subordinates were supposed to defer to their superiors. Here are the 5 basic Confucian relationships. So they're mostly arranged around subordinates and authorities. There's very little equality except in the friend-to-friend relationship. So you have the ruler and his subject, and you have a father and his son, a husband and his wife, and an elder brother and a younger brother. These kind of went for father and son. You could also say mother and daughter, or father and daughter, or mother and son. So basically, a subject was supposed to show loyalty to a ruler, while a ruler showed benevolence and protection for the subject. A son was supposed to show filial piety for his father. He was supposed to respect and to honor his father, and then in return the father would care for and protect the son. A wife was supposed to show loyalty to her husband, and a husband loyalty and protection to his wife. And a younger sibling was supposed to show brotherliness or sisterliness to his elder brother, and then the elder brother showed protection and care to the younger brother. And then friends just sort of showed faithfulness to each other. Confucius wanted the people of China to focus on nurturing relationships in this way. Now, after Confucius's teachings were sort of spread around China, his values began really taking deep root. By the time of the Han Dynasty, which we're going to talk about in a couple modules, more specifically, there developed a Confucian social structure. So at the very top, is the emperor, of course. And then below him are the first class. So the court, nobles, government officials, basically the literati. So the people who could write and were knowledgeable and educated and fancy. And then below them are the second class, which is the peasants. These are farmers. So this is kind of interesting because in most Western social structures at this time, the peasants were the lowest rung of people, and they were the most numerous too. Confucius really valued farmers as producers, and he referred to them as primary producers. I mean, they make the food that all of us need to eat to survive. Below them are artisans. They were considered secondary producers because artisans made things that people didn't necessarily need to survive, but like tools and clothes, things that were of secondary importance to food. And then below them are the fourth class, which are the merchants. And Confucius regarded merchants as society's parasites. They basically made money off of making deals between people. They were like middlemen. And so Confucius and his followers had a sort of hostile attitude towards merchants and really towards capitalism in general. I mean, capitalism proper wasn't quite a conception at the time of Confucius's life, but a lot of people think that his attitudes toward merchants is the beginning of a deep-rooted hostility towards capitalism in Chinese culture. Confucius's worldview was extraordinarily pervasive in Chinese culture and still is today. For example, the Zhou era tombs of Chinese aristocrats housed ceremonial bells that you can see here. Scholars theorize that the bells were markers of status. The harmony of these bells working together was a musical embodiment of the idea of Confucian social harmony. So this is kind of another example of Chinese culture revolving around the idea of harmony. Confucianism stimulated a culture of ancestor-worship. Now you have a very short clip, I think it's a YouTube clip in your submodule that is assigned to you. Please make sure that you watch that. That's going to cover the basics of ancestor worship. I'm just kind of mentioning it here. Ancestor worship became important for people to demonstrate their deference to their elders, to their elders' elders, and their elders' elders, etc., in accordance with the notion of filial piety. So I want you to, as you watch the short ancestor worship video, think a bit about why a philosophy like this would develop in China as opposed to other areas of the world that we've studied. What benefits did this worldview bring to rulers in China? What benefits did it bring to men versus benefits to women, or to the elderly versus to the young? Think about how these values shaped different people's lives.